of what we discussed the last time that we got together, which is the basics pretty much. And we call it basics, but it really isn't all that basic. So I think a quick reminder is always helpful to go over what we call the 5 factors of special needs planning, just to kind of, and also with a little bit of a housing tilt in this discussion tonight. So please, any questions, just let me know. Our special needs planning team is myself on the left, Cindy in the middle, and my father, John, on the right. So we are all loved ones, 2 individuals with special needs. So I have a younger brother. He is just turned 31 the beginning of this year, James. He actually was in our office today. He has supported employment 2 days a week. He loves to shred. So I have learned to be very careful not to leave any important papers when he is laser focused on his job, because he has shredded many you turn for a second, he's just very, very focused on any task that he's doing, and we've lost some things, but that's okay. We've lesson learned, right? Just like with all of our loved ones. So we know that he's a very disciplined worker. So Cindy and John have been working together, and I joined a little bit. It's going to be 10 years next year this time. So 9 years I've been working with the both of them, but they've been working together for over 25 years, probably closer to 30 at this point now that James is 30 years old. So my father was actually in the financial service industry before my little brother was born, and realized that there really wasn't any information out there on how to plan. So what they did was they wrote the special needs planning guide. They actually had a second edition that just recently came out. So this is kind of a little bit of outdated photo, but what I can do, Pam, is I can send you a link to the new book, because there is some updated information in there, including the ABLE account. And actually, we'd love to send a copy to Cotting for your library to add. So we'll do that after this presentation. You guys can have a copy there. You can share with families. And it's still, a lot of the similar information to what it had before, but again, really updated for language, including the ABLE accounts, and also talking a little bit about creating a team to carry on, sharing as many stories as we can about what other families have been doing, especially in the community, because I think that is really a very helpful piece to try to be creative, because it really does take a lot of creativity when you are thinking of the long-term plan for your loved one. I actually was reading another special needs planning book over the weekend, and they had a very helpful kind of analogy that they used, and they compared special needs planning to a family road trip. So if you think about it, when you go on a family road trip, you have a destination. So we all, just for ourselves too, when you think of retirement planning, do I want to travel? Do I want to, you have an end goal, right? To be financially secure, to be able to have, financial resources to be able to travel. For your loved one with special needs, the end goal is for them to be independent, happy, have friends, be a part of the community, or whatever, that end goal is for your loved one. But along the way, you're probably going to get, or you could potentially get, a flat tire. You may get stuck in traffic. You also are probably going to have a lot of really fun experiences and visit new places, go to different restaurants, and family trips are always fun to do with more people. So that really leads us a little bit to the creating the team to carry on too. So the more people that are in the, if you're in a big RV traveling, how fun is that, right? So kind of thinking of, and where will those stops be? And every single stop that you have, whether or not you're stuck in traffic, it will bring you further, and you'll have different learning experiences. So I thought that was a really kind of fun way to put special needs planning.
It also makes you think that the unexpected things in a trip sometimes are unexpectedly good, as opposed to always unexpectedly problems. So it's nice to think of it like a trip where you can learn something that's not quite as scary as you think.
Exactly. A flat tire, we know how to fix it. Or you learn and you can do it quicker next time, right? So I think really just kind of thinking about it that way, that it is nothing that will happen overnight. It takes time. It is a journey. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. So today's agenda, I am going to be focusing mostly on housing, going really quickly through the first couple of items here. So when it comes to planning, you guys have probably seen this slide before. It really is about striking a balance between what government resources you have and personal resources. For many of you probably attending Cotting, you probably are getting the entitlement of an education through your public school system, where Cotting is being provided for from this town that you're living in. Wonderful, wonderful benefit. At age 22, that is when that benefit will likely come to an end. And then you'll transition to adult services. So the big time is between ages 14 and ages 22 to kind of figure out what are those different items that your child likes to do, what life skills do they want to begin learning to help them be as independent as possible when they do turn age 22. So you likely, if you've attended any of our presentations before, have seen this, because I think this is very helpful. This kind of, I'm thinking maybe we update this to kind of look a little bit more like a road trip and seeing these different items that you'll kind of go along your life journey, as well as your child's life journey. When are you going to retire, as well as how will that impact your child in their future benefits as well. So the 5 factors of special needs planning are the emotional factors. I think that really has a lot to do with housing. When you're thinking of, well, am I ready to have my child move out, or are they anxious to move out of the house? They've seen big brother, big sister go off to college, and now they're ready to make that leap as well. And how do you kind of deal with all of those emotions with any type of transition, but especially if your child is planning to move out of your home, whether it be local, further away. Some kids go to transition programs in other states, which obviously can be a little bit more challenging for maybe the parent than the child in some situations. But how do you again kind of deal with those pieces and having conversations about it, and being that it's okay to have those types of emotions. Then the financial, so that is reviewing your situation, really making sure. Cindy has a phrase that she likes to use, put your face mask on first when you are planning, because if you're not able to plan for yourself in your personal planning, it will be very challenging, if not impossible, to be able to provide for your child during their adult years too. So making sure you're doing what you should, maximizing, your retirement plan contributions, reviewing your employee benefits, and saving as much as you possibly can, doing tax planning to help increase what you have in your overall savings. Then government benefits. So that is both the federal and the state benefits. So we'll talk about both today, and how you can kind of access some of those and how they can potentially be used for housing. And then legal, a big question that people often ask when it comes to legal planning and housing as well. How should I register? Maybe I am going to be purchasing a property for my child. Should it be in the child's name? Should it be in a special needs trust? Should it be in my name? And like everything, it really does depend, but I'll give some examples I think that would be helpful for families to understand maybe when and why and how you would use maybe a trust as part of your planning for housing. And then family and support. So the people, right? For all of us, like we're talking about, having a lot of folks in an RV, the more people, the more fun, but also it is helpful for parents to kind of starting to develop this team, because if your child is moving out of the family home, it's very unlikely that you'll be the one doing the day-to-day that like you're doing today. So who is going to be the one checking in on your son or daughter? Do they need someone living with them 24/7? And if so, do they need someone, awake at night with them, or do they need someone maybe just checking in the morning and making sure they're getting up, kind of being a little bit of an alarm clock? So we'll talk more about the different types of family and friends and professionals that may be part of your child's life as they do phase out. Any questions so far?
Nothing in the chat so far, but feel free to log in there or speak up.
Perfect. So when it comes to legal planning, it really is most conversations are around guardianship as well as estate planning. So making sure that you do have the proper trusts in place. So if you are thinking about potentially purchasing a property for your child with special needs, technically, they can own a home in their name and it will not impact any government benefits that they should receive. First and foremost, so they can live in a home, have a home, as long as it's not, a mansion where it's unrealistic and they're renting out rooms to other people, they can have, you know, a 2-bedroom condo or a 2-bedroom house, or you name it, something very realistic again in their name, and still qualify for SSI, for Medicaid, for any type of federal benefit programs. However, it may not be the most advantageous option to kind of structure it that way. You may choose to own a property instead in the parent's name. That way you can kind of help to oversee everything. You could also make sure that all the bills are being paid. And I think I just like simple. Why overcomplicate things by potentially having a home in your child's name? Because you would, unless they have assets in their name today, there would need to be some gifting strategies to pass the asset from your estate to their estate, which could potentially eliminate them from eligibility for some benefits, maybe for a month or potentially longer. So it is not whether or not they can own a home. It really is, how do you pass that asset or give them an asset of such a value where they would not potentially be impacted by benefits. So really the easiest way when it comes to housing would be for the parents to purchase a property. It would in essence be an investment property where you could even rent it out to your child with special needs, collect an income stream, and pay for all of the different, you know, different costs that are associated with that. So probably wouldn't be a very high tax liability of the income that you're generating, and then be able to pay for additional supports using some of that income that's being generated from that property as well, to pay for your child or daughter's, maybe a roommate that's living with them and providing support. So this is kind of similar to a situation that my parents actually have, where they bought a multifamily property with the long-term plan that James eventually will live there. So he is not living there yet. We're talking a little bit more serious about maybe looking at having him move into one of those units there. But first and foremost, it's an investment property. They purchased it that way with the idea that, again, maybe James could move into one of those units. And if not, there is rental income that's being generated from that property. Even if he doesn't live in one of those units, he eventually could live somewhere else. He does have a Section 8 voucher he qualified for somehow when he was 22 years old, which I'll talk more about too. Small town of Melrose, and his name just came to the top. And I'll share a little bit more about our personal story and what they're doing with that now in a couple minutes. But I think really thinking of the legal factors, that's a question that we're often asked, is how do we, if we are looking to purchase a property for our son or daughter, how do we register that? Is it in the trust? Is it in our child's name? Is it in our name? And again, this is most situations it would be in the parent's name, but if there are obviously other scenarios where it may make sense to do something different. So not an umbrella statement. Happy to chat with you if you think that your situation is a bit unique, and we can talk a little bit more about that. And I'd be happy to make introductions to different attorneys too that could help. And also, again, really just focusing that a lot of people especially think, well, when I buy the house, then it's going, you know, then my child can move in there. But there's many other factors that actually are a lot more challenging, even in this housing market, than buying a house. So usually kind of purchasing the property is one of the last things that you do, unless, again, you are looking at it first and foremost as an investment and generating income. So, so that's a little bit. So again, just really important, if you haven't done so already, that you do create an estate plan so that your assets are left to the special needs trust. I know this presentation is not as much focused on that, but since we're all here together tonight, I think that that's just a gentle push. Really important, again, to make sure that you have those estate planning documents completed, and that you have the people in the documents that you want to be able to step in for you in the future. So that's the trustees, the future guardians, but as many of you may know, the guardians are appointed by the courts. So even if you put in your will who you want, there is that extra step that needs to be done, which is a good thing, right? Because maybe that person isn't a good fit anymore. You don't want that to be an automatic job that somebody gets. You want them to kind of have to apply for it at that time to make sure that they're a good fit. But assuming that they are, the courts will definitely look at your document and take that as your intention. So the government benefits, I think this is a really big piece when it comes to housing, is understanding the way that these different government programs work. A lot of people in the past used to tell us when we did presentations, oh, well, the state's going to take care of my son or daughter, you know, they're going to be all set, you know, we're going to maybe just, you know, we're going to move to another state, and that means that DDS is then going to provide them housing. Well, it doesn't work that way. There's a very specific process that families have to go through. We'll talk a little bit about that, but the good thing is there are a lot of entitlement programs that are funded by the federal government that really are helpful and can add up to quite a decent amount, which could help to pay for ongoing expenses when your child is living out of your home. So really thinking about them in two different buckets, state and federal. So federal really kicks in once your child turns age 18, because at that point, technically, your child is no longer viewed as a child. They are now an adult when it comes to their income, and their assets are theirs, and your income and your assets are yours, and not viewed for them for income and asset limit tests. And then the non-entitlement programs, so that's by state appropriation. So there's a budget that's created each year that is then, DDS has different line items, one of them being residential supports, one of them being day supports. And I suggest, if you have any interest at all in understanding how this works, connecting with the ARC of Massachusetts. They do a wonderful job with advocacy, and also share a lot of different newsletters on what they're advocating for with the budget, and they would love your help to try to voice your story as well, to hopefully get more resources, because the more resources that DDS gets, the more people that they can serve. So again, if you have any interest at all, I suggest reaching out to the ARC and signing up at least for their newsletter. So here are the federal government benefit entitlement programs. So two things, you really want to make sure that your child, especially if they're getting close to the age of 18, does not have more than $2,000 in their name. So this would be any bank account that they have, if they received savings bonds when they were first born, anything that is tied to them at all, then you would want to make sure that before they turn age 18, that it's below the $2,000. The great thing is there is an option now that you don't have to go and just spend that money as quickly as you can to get it below the $2,000. Instead, you could use an ABLE account and transfer any money that's above the $2,000 into an ABLE. If it does exceed more than $16,000, then you may need to use some different types of planning strategies. But if you have a couple of years, then you can gift money into the ABLE account over, again, a couple of years to be able to get them beneath the $2,000. It's a very, and yes, that is the right link. It's a very, very low dollar amount. So we wish they just increased that a little bit versus having these ABLE accounts, but that's been the number for many, many, many years. So really important if you are thinking of Social Security, income, SSI, and the other item is if they can't have more than $2,000 in their name, and if they are working, they cannot earn more than $1,360 a month. And that's assuming if they are blind, they potentially could be able to earn a little bit more than that. But if you for SSI, intellectual disabilities, autism, or a variety of different types of disabilities, and SSI, again, it's $1,360. So I'll talk about that in a moment. So technically 529 plans, if the child is the beneficiary, they are not the owner. So you could remove them as beneficiary if you wanted. So that actually makes that asset not countable for SSI purposes. So you can keep money, you can be the owner as long as the parents are the owner and the child is the beneficiary of the 529 plan. You can have $1 million in the 529 and still be eligible, and the child would still be eligible for SSI. The difficulties with that, though, is taking distributions out, because that 529 plan is actually tied to the Social Security number. So you may choose to instead do some conversions or rollovers, they call them, from the 529 to a 529A, which is the ABLE account. So, or keep it in there. Your child may go to a higher education. You can use $10,000 a year for elementary education, high school as well. So there is some flexibility with the 529 too, but it would not disqualify them.
Just another quick question from the chat. Can you speak to savings bonds? That is, if the bond isn't payable until someone's death, does it count towards the $2,000?
I've never heard of that.
I'm not familiar with that either.
Yeah, maybe they're the beneficiary. So if they're the beneficiary, then it wouldn't be countable to them until it's in their name. So the parent may want to cash the bond out before they pass away so that it doesn't end up in the child's name. So I'm not sure. I'm not too familiar with that type of bond.
Sorry, can I ask? That was me who asked it. Like, we have a couple savings bonds grandparents have bought for my daughter, but they're not payable until they pass away. But when they pass away, they will be over $2,000.
So it sounds like it's in the grandparent's name now. They may be able to change the beneficiary to either you or someone else. I've never heard of like an irrevocable bond, but I would reach out to the custodian. So it doesn't count. It's not in her social security number, your child's social security number right now. But you would probably want to update the beneficiary so it's doesn't go directly to your child.
Okay, thank you.
And yes, you could name the savings bond beneficiary directly to the special needs trust. There are there's limits on how much can be contributed to the ABLE account. So I haven't really heard many people being able to name the ABLE as a direct beneficiary. Instead, it may be left to the person, and then that same month they would deposit into the ABLE, but they would lose SSI for that month. So that's definitely probably a question for an attorney if you can direct it to the ABLE. But again, there's so many limits on how much can be contributed each year. Usually we would suggest creating a special needs trust and having all assets be then named to pass on to the special needs trust. So never to your child directly. The ABLE, that's a little bit more complicated because technically it's in your child's name, so it may disqualify them for a short period of time. So we again always suggest kind of flowing it through a special needs trust when possible. And that also gives you the most flexibility, no Medicaid reimbursement either when it comes to the special needs trust when created before a parent passes away. So the 529 is definitely, if you're the owner, it won't impact you. But again, the difficulty is taking the money out, because if you make a withdrawal, there is a tax form that's created that could potentially be linked to your child with special needs. And that would show that distribution was made kind of to the social security number. So not with the asset itself, but again, with kind of accessing it. So supplemental security, mass health, and then ABLE accounts have not been around for 6 years, and maybe they have, maybe just 6 years, I think 2016, 2017. So maybe that was why. And then Medicaid, mass health. So the good thing is in Massachusetts, when you apply for SSI, there's an automatic enrollment in mass health, which is a very hefty application if you have to do it by itself. So we're a lucky state in that regard. The mass health criteria is actually not as strict as SSI. So most people actually are approved for mass health before they're approved for SSI. And mass health, actually, it's a state administered federal benefit, so it's Medicaid, which you may have heard of before, and it does provide for a lot of different supports that you may not be aware of. So when your child turns age 22, they could maybe be enrolled into a day program. There are different, it's called Medicaid waivers that pay for some different items, including transportation, day programs. However, you may want to have more DDS funding when you're talking with your case coordinator, when you're switching to that, to have a little bit more flexibility. So Medicaid day habs are not as flexible as DDS dollars. So the goal in advocating for the transition would be DDS, state funded programs. Again, that budget typically allows for a lot more flexibility. And mass health, the state obviously wants to get as much mass health resources as possible, because then that can help to offset what they are paying out of pocket for the state. So it is important for individuals that maybe those types of programs are the best fit, that obviously you access Medicaid as whenever possible. And then premium reimbursement is another great benefit. So when your child turns age 18 and they are eligible for Mass Health and you are paying for a family plan of insurance, you could actually be reimbursed for some of your premium coverages. Your premium costs. So if you have like a family plan and you really only needed maybe just one person or husband and wife, and now you're paying for a family plan instead, Medicaid will actually pay the difference in many situations. So Mass Family Voices does a great job helping families, or the Federation for Children with Special Needs. They help individuals kind of with the application. They're really good with children and health insurance, so they may be able to help you there. And it's again a great benefit to be able to help kind of increase what the government benefits that you're receiving into the households. And the reason why Mass Health and Medicaid does that is because they're kind of saying, thank you, we'll be the secondary insured, we'll pay for your premiums, which typically would be less out of pocket for Mass Health than being the primary insurance. Another benefit is AFC. So AFC is a adult family care. So if your child needs assistance with their activities of daily living, then you can be named as their caregiver as long as you're not the guardian. That's why up top it says watch guardianship in AFC, because again, you have to live with the individual but cannot be the guardian. So in two parent households, so for example, with my brother James, he needs pretty much hand over hand supports with some ADLs and a lot of prompting. So he has the highest level of AFC, which is I think around $1,300 a month. Every agency is a little bit different with what they pay because they have a cost of overseeing the program. So a nurse actually comes to the house once a month to check in, see is James improving, what's going on with him, the social worker as well. And then you can get a tax-free stipend again per month. So think about this. So SSI, if they are paying for their own household expenses, that's around $750 or so a month. And then you add on potentially AFC, that could be $1,100 a month to pay for a direct care person that's living in the household with your son or daughter. So maybe they have a Section 8 voucher, which is the next public benefit here, which would pay for about 75% of their rent. And then the remaining 25% potentially would come from SSI. So they could have their rental expenses completely paid for, living in a Section 8 housing. And a lot of, people kind of say like, oh, well, I don't want my son or daughter living in a Section 8 house. Well, every single apartment complex that's being built, there is a requirement that they have a certain number of affordable housing units in there. So make sure you kind of contact your housing authority if you are in the hunt for maybe an apartment for your son or daughter, because these apartment buildings kind of tend to say, oh, well, I put in a notice, but nobody knows where these notices go. So if you go to the housing authority and kind of say, hey, I see that building is going up over there, like how many units are affordable housing and who's moving in there, ask questions, kind of get to know the people in the housing authority to see if you can have your son or daughter, if they're ready, move into one of those units potentially. There's a lot of different types of vouchers too. It's not, well, a lot of different types of subsidies. It's not just a voucher. So you can go again to the housing authority. Maybe there's a new project that's being developed. And again, they need a couple of units. So your son or daughter could potentially move into one of those units and it would be an affordable unit. So much more reasonable in cost, and they could get a voucher based on their disability, their assets and income, and have it be mostly covered using government benefits. So, but then you can have someone living with them, $1,100 a month potentially. It really depends again on the ADLs that they would need, and that would be paid for. Or another type of care person is a PCA. So maybe your son or daughter qualifies for a couple hours a week or many hours a week. Well, then you can hire someone to come in and help with some different supports living in an independent home. So we have a few clients that kind of figured this out, and they were ended up able to get a Section 8 voucher for 2 bedrooms because their child does need supports. That 2-bedroom is covered, again, because of the disability. And also then having a combination of PCA hours and also some DDS dollars. So technically for this family was an autism only diagnosis. Technically you really can't use some DDS dollars, but you can talk to them about being again creative and saying, well, we're going to have a job coach and they're gonna do other things outside of just maybe work, maybe check in, go grocery shopping, those types of things really help again your son or daughter be as independent as possible. So it really comes, trying to be as creative as possible. And this family actually had their son live close by to where he went to college, and then had two of his friends move in. So it was a 3-bedroom and was very reasonable in cost for them. One person kind of contributed to rent, and they got a very inexpensive house in exchange for some providing support. So same thing for families that maybe want to buy a property, same thing that my parents talked about was maybe, well, artists, we're thinking we're going to have this art kind of gallery place in the property, and they're really fun and friendly and and thinking that there would almost be like a little community for James to kind of support him with people that would be his speed, right? So just thinking a little bit again outside of the box when developing these different relationships as time goes on.
Alex, a question just came to me, and I think I know the answer, but I'm not sure. The question is, does taking the adult family care stipend affect your child's place on the Section 8 or other housing wait list? And I would answer no, but I don't know if you know more than I do about this.
So technically it should be no. I have heard Section 8 is like a dark hole, and nobody really knows the rules. And
there are many things like that.
Exactly. So you can almost appeal everything and anything. So it technically shouldn't. My brother is receiving AFC. He has a Section 8 voucher. He got it when he was 22. They had AFC before that. But I have heard other families say, oh, well, they're lower on the list because of AFC potentially. Or that's kind of what they're saying. Or DDS would say, oh, well, they have AFC dollars, so we're maybe not going to give you as much other resources. But again, it really is a negotiation with everything. So it definitely should not, because that's very different supports. That's residential living skills versus DDS. Typically, most people are prioritized for day services, right? Versus residential, which we'll talk a little bit in
and one other thing I just wanted to add, and is that if you're receiving adult family care, you can't still receive PCA support. So you have to choose one or the other, unfortunately, in some ways, because some individuals need both. But it comes from the same pot of money from Mass Health. So you can only do one or the other.
Very good point. So we suggest kind of doing a little bit of an analysis. How many hours would you get maybe from PCA? Is that a lot more than the AFC? But also the difference between the two is that PCA, you actually would hire like a third party. You would hire someone else. So it wouldn't be somebody living in the household, or it could be a sibling, potentially could be a sibling. But it's a kind of like an employment agreement versus AFC is really with the caregiver and the agency. So it's sometimes a little bit harder to find PCA staff than maybe it would be if you got a stipend, and then you could pay someone maybe even a little bit more. Don't want to overcomplicate things, but that's just some different scenarios that parents have done. Well, I'll take the $1,100 and pay someone $5 more than what they would get as a PCA, maybe to get someone a little bit more qualified, depending on the number of hours that they need and so forth. There's not many people out there doing direct care. That's like the biggest issue right now. Again, going back is the people.
That's for sure. I just want to share some other questions from the chat. One is, does taking AFC affect their standing for DDS housing priority? Do you need to be approved by DDS to receive AFC? Those are some of the questions.
So yeah, you do not need to be approved by DDS to receive AFC. However, it is administered by a nonprofit organization. So you will have some agency relationship, which most of them also have DDS contracts. So an agency is like the ARC of Massachusetts. So the way the DDS works, let's move to the next slide real quick, and we'll go back and cover all these topics, of course, too. So the way that it works, going back to the budget. So the state has a budget for DDS. It's one of the biggest budgets out of all the different branches of organizations, I guess, another term, but in Massachusetts. So It's under EOHSS, right? And then, so DDS has again, the largest budget. And then there's also the Department of Mental Health, Mass Commission for the Blind, Mass Rehab Commission. So those are all different agencies that provide support for individuals with special needs. And just like the name says, Department of Mental Health, obviously, if you have a mental health diagnosis, you go to DMH, Mass Commission for the Blind, Mass Rehab Commission. Mass Rehab Commission really helps people short term to kind of help with employment, maybe helping with a resume, learning some skills for interviews. DDS stays with an individual for their entire lifetime. So one of the line items is turning 22 budget. So when you turn 22, that's really important for you over the next couple of years to develop a plan, a person-centered plan, we like to say, that's kind of focused on your loved one to figure out what they're going to do every single day. DDS typically gives most people priority 2. Priority 2 means that you qualify for some day supports. Priority 1 means that you qualify for residential supports. It is very hard, and there's less and less individuals, even if they are in the past, if you were living in, we had a placement, a residential placement for like high school, then you would almost automatically go. They are now looking at every single individual to see who qualifies, who doesn't qualify. People are living longer, things are more expensive, and that's really why. So pretty much the way the priority 1 works is if your child is really not able to live at the family home, if there's like a health risk, if they have some significant behaviors, if they are, kind of harming themselves or harming someone else potentially in the home, that's when we usually see the priority 1.
Mhm.
So I would not assume by any stretch that you're going to be getting any residential funding from DDS. It's more day services. However, DDS services are administered a little bit different now than they ever were in the past, where instead of you needing, so that the way that they used to work is DDS receives money in the budget, they then fund an agency. There's a contract between an agency and DDS for that person. And then the agency provides whatever supports are kind of in that contract to the individual. Well, now there's another way. If you kind of come up with a great plan, well, here's what I want to do. I'm going to oversee this. You can do a self-directed model where maybe you receive a budget. It goes into this portal where you can kind of then direct where the services go. And there are different line items in the service. It really is meant to hire people and helping people with kind of, payroll and so forth. So being a little bit more creative. So therefore, there's no agency in the middle. The other option is called agency with choice, where that's one option that my parents do. They have agency with choice, where they use an agency to help find people to hire, and they are the ones that oversee. They do all the HR, the hiring, the firing, the doing the queries and all of that. So and that's sometimes what people choose to do. My mom just did not want another thing on her list, right? To kind of try to find staff and make sure that they are vetted in all of that and have experience. And so she chose to do agency with choice. So 2 days a week, that's what we do. More and more families are doing the self-directed model. It does take some work on the family side. So kind of talking to DDS, I bring it up, ask them. And then again, you get kind of an allotment, and then you can choose where the funds go. So that's where it does come to be creative with, what to do for a housing perspective. Maybe you can hire some people to come into your son or daughter's home and using some of those DDS dollars, or maybe hiring a coach to kind of help them learn some more independent skills. Also, maybe looking at different technology, maybe a camera that kind of says, hey, get up, wake up. It's time to get up in the morning. Anything that kind of can help, again, a family be a little bit more independent helps with the people, and that's usually what the most expensive part of all of this is when it comes to housing. Even though we live in a very expensive state, the housing is a drop in the bucket compared to what those ongoing costs would be to not replace, but to kind of step in if they're not living in the family home anymore. Is that helpful? Okay. So yeah, so really, I suggest one thing that I've done, and I think it's a great thing for families, is to join the Citizen Advisory Board. They also have, so then we're not doing it right now, but you could take tours of different group homes and see how one agency runs over another agency. If you are potentially thinking eventually a group home, if your child maybe is prioritized, that's something you may want to talk about, or you could hire the agency maybe to run a household that families kind of personally fund. So every situation is so unique. There are agencies that are doing a little bit of a private funding too, if families are looking for that, or specialized housing is a great example of another place where a family could actually purchase a unit in a larger home. And then what the specialized housing agency does and has done very well over a very long period of time is kind of commingle those federal benefits to then provide some support for the overall house. So they say, oh, well, all these kids are receiving, well, young adults or older adults at this point, they've been there for many years. Some of them you could, kind of have that be part of the overall allocation for everyone to provide those supports. So, I think that's a common question that people ask is, can I have my child live in my home or make my house a group home? Or, it's, again, kind of going back, the house is a house. It's the least challenging piece of this whole puzzle. It's like the last thing you want to think about. So I would start, agencies, some are open to it, some are not. An agency, even if you give them a house, like there's a lot of criteria that houses have to meet for them before they're gonna, buy them. So I just think that that's very challenging. Again, I would talk to other agencies first before you would think about buying something and say, here's the house, we now provide supports to my son or daughter. So it's just a little bit more complicated than that, but it's not impossible. Families have definitely done it where they purchase properties together. There's a legal document that kind of oversees everything. Maybe an agency runs it. You want to make sure that the people are aligned. If you are bringing in 3 or 4 different individuals, well, can all families afford this long term? And then also, what about the kids? What about their behaviors and their personalities? And, like my brother loves to dance and be loud and sing, and maybe someone else likes their quiet time, has a little bit more of a sensory issue. They would not be good roommates, so just making sure that you kind of think about that too, because I think that really is the most challenging piece of it all. I've known so many families that their kids have gone to school together, they think it's a perfect transition. Well, they don't like being in the room more than 5 minutes together. Well, they're not going to be good roomies. Again, we all know who we like to live with. Like even our best friends, you may not want to live with them. So thinking about that, just like your son or daughter. So special needs planning, I think we've talked a lot about this, but I think it's important for us to spend some time going over some of the things. So creating the letter of intent, I think that's a great starting point when you are thinking about where your son or daughter wants to be long-term in housing, especially. Because then it can kind of identify, like we talked about a little bit about that roadmap, what is the long-term plan? What do they want to do during the day? And I would not feel any pressure. I do not know many families that at the age of 22, once they graduate from school, then have a housing situation all set up. It takes a long time. You want to figure out what is your son or daughter going to do during the day? And then what are they going to do? How are they going to be able to provide for themselves in a household without mom and dad? So here's a couple slides to kind of go over housing too. You want to figure out there are different agencies that can provide an assessment for your child to see how independent are they. Can they turn the oven on, and do they remember to shut it off? Maybe turning it on isn't the hard part, but making sure that it isn't on for all night long is even more important. And do they know how to call 911? Some of those basic things that would really need to be set in stone before they were able to move out of the house. So maybe doing an assessment and then working towards that. Talking to Cotting and other different types of groups that can help with some life skills that would really, again, help them to be as independent as possible. So these are the different pieces, like we kind of talked about, the physical structure, which again, I think is the easiest piece. We've all maybe, or many of us have purchased a home before. Yeah, it's stressful, but at the same time, it's a one-time you buy it, it's there. Maintenance. But when you think about the different supports and how many phone calls we've all received over, about what's going on with your kid and they're sick today, you need to pick them up, just thinking about that long-term when they're not living in your house, that really is the piece that takes more work. It's not impossible. A lot of families have done this, but it does take the majority of your time and the costs. So, you want to think about the fun stuff too. Are they contributing to the community? What community are they living in? Are they near public transportation? So thinking of those, these different types of things, like the social calendar. You don't want them moving out of the family home and then just sitting in this maybe beautiful house that they have, but not doing anything because they are a little bit separate from what they were used to before. So thinking about all these different types of supports that they would need, who's going to take them to medical appointments? Are they taking medications? Maybe there's different technologies that you can use to kind of replace what a person is doing today. Thinking again, a little bit outside of the box. Who's going to pay the bills for the household? The personal support, the nutrition, and the hygiene. If they're living outside of the family home, no one's saying, hey, what's going on? You didn't brush your hair today. So who's going to be the one to do that? And there are different agencies that maybe your son or daughter doesn't need someone living in the household with them all the time. Maybe they just need someone checking in if they have a roommate, checking in on them to make sure that things are, they're cleaning up, there's food in the fridge. Well, there are some agencies that are starting to provide these types of oversights. And maybe it's not needed on a regular basis when parents or siblings or family or neighbors are involved, but you can kind of notch it up a little bit as parents get older, and maybe you're looking to move to a different state, or you name it, what, depending on whatever your objectives and goals are. So kind of figure out all of those different pieces. And then I think we all kind of have negotiables and non-negotiables, right? With where we maybe want to live or who we want to live with. So I would identify those different things. So what are things that you maybe could be a little bit more flexible with? And what are things that you really want to be set in stone? Like, I want them to live in the same town that they grew up in, because that's where people recognize them. That's where they're going to be the most comfortable. Or maybe, it's maybe a little less expensive out west, or there are a lot of people there's a lot of communities out there that, again, maybe a little bit more welcoming, and maybe they don't like as busy with the traffic lights and all of that, and the busy commotion of a city. So thinking about those different items and really outlining what those top things are and things that, again, you could change. And then really another thing is, we've all lived in many different places throughout our life. Your child with special needs may also not live in one place forever. So renting something may be a great idea as a first step to have them move out of the family home, versus making a very big commitment to something that you may think is going to be forever, but likely will need to change at some point. We all, again, have lived maybe in a busy, multifamily with like in the city, and then we decided, well, we want a little bit more space as we get older, or maybe we want to have 4 roommates when we're 22, but then when we turn 32, we want to have 2 roommates, and then maybe, so thinking about it just like you would think about it, and talk to your son or daughter. I know Cindy has shared that for the longest time, she always thought that her brother was like he is a very social guy. Like, he loves to chat. He's like the center of the party. But when they started planning and thinking about where he was going to live, they never asked him, how many roommates do you want? And they were thinking 3 or 4. And then all of a sudden he's like, what are you talking about? I don't want to live with that many people. I've already grew up with 3 or 4 siblings. I don't want to, I want to have my own space. So, and I think we're so better at that today than probably people were many, many years ago, like doing the person-centered planning, having these conversations, including everyone in the discussion. I know my brother's very different with me than he is with, my brother, with my husband, with you name it, very different personality. It's amazing to see, so I think having those types of discussions with people to see and get their opinion on what they think that your son or daughter would like to do. So states, other states, I think Massachusetts does a nice job compared to other states. We technically don't have what's called like a waiting list. Instead, it really is based on prioritization. So in many other states, they kind of have this long list. Like, some people say, oh, I have to move here, I have to live here for 10 years in order for me to be able to even think about getting any type of residential support. So they're different, but the good thing is a lot of these federal supports are very similar. And in some states, the cost, if you think about Massachusetts, we have a lot of competition for jobs, right? Where we're in a very busy tech world, with Cambridge, people can find starting entry-level jobs for working somewhere like that and move their way up, versus direct care, which I think can be very hard for someone to live and provide for their family on that type of income. Where in some other states, it maybe is much more affordable for them to be able to live. So I think that's our biggest issue in Massachusetts, is being able to find staff based on the pay grade and having them be able to live a nice life, because they obviously have a very hard and meaningful job and they do it for a reason. And that's, I think, the biggest struggle, especially in this state. So, and that's across the board now. We work with families in many states actually, and it's something that isn't just here either. So, but that's over the past several years, what we've seen is that sometimes, again, in different states, it's a little bit easier for providing direct care. So I feel like I've talked a lot and really fast sometimes. So here's something that we think is helpful. And, you know, like when you go to Yelp and you see how expensive things are. So on the very bottom, you can see the dollars. And like we talked about, kind of, you know, looking at residential options, two ticks, and then the ongoing residential supports, obviously that being the most expensive, as well as the ongoing employment and day services. So thinking about it that way, again, I think it is nice to see a physical structure. It's like, okay, it's there, it's tangible, but really I think focusing on the day, what is your child going to be doing? And then moving on, maybe they have a great relationship. I remember we had this awesome gentleman, unfortunately decided to change careers, but my dad would drive by that Stoneham property all the time, say, do you want to live there? Do you want to live there? He was a great guy, you know, and really over the years, we've had people that have really gotten close to James, go on family vacations with us, you name it, like holiday parties, whatever way we can really kind of include them in our day-to-day life and have them see James, because he is a great guy, just like I'm sure all of your children are, and just trying to grab onto those people that mean a lot to our loved ones. And maybe there's years where we don't talk at all, but then they are in the picture later on, and it's not going to be just one person. It really is a team. And that's what we'll talk a lot about in the next discussion that we'll be scheduling, you know, probably soon, to talk about how do you kind of structure that. And because there are formal roles and there are informal roles. And the informal roles will probably change over time. The formal roles may change as well, but kind of thinking about it that way, because really it's impossible to ever replace what a parent does, but it is possible to create a team that can help to kind of step into some of those different responsibilities. They say it takes a journey to raise any child, right? Especially a special needs child. So just thinking about it that way too, I think is a little bit helpful. And then here just goes over a little bit of how you fund that. You know, we talked a lot about that in the very beginning, about the SSI, the SSDI, different state agencies, Medicaid funding, as well as personal resources. So here's just a quick, you know, example of what you could receive potentially. So this is around $3,300 a month. So this is from SSI, a Section 8 voucher, and then AFC. So that obviously could be used to potentially help offset some different rental expenses, provide for some type of care, and then maybe having the family supplement that in some way. So there are a lot of strategies to think about, you know, gifting, maybe from grandparents if they have the ability to do so, to kind of fund directly to a residential program, which may qualify for a medical expense, which they could gift a little bit more. We also talk about potentially funding life insurance so that there could be money when both parents pass away. So there are a lot of different strategies that, you know, we'd be happy to talk to families about, but this, I think, was just a very, very kind of high level, but I think it really is important to take a step back and start to think about, again, what your child would like to do during the day. Make sure you're applying for all these benefits once they turn age 18, because a Section 8 voucher can take a very long time to get. They're saying it's around a 10-year waiting list at this point. But if your child is ready to move out, again, go to the local housing authority, build those relationships. It really, really is about a little bit about who you know, and again, just kind of talking with other families about what they're doing. And it is possible to kind of create something a little bit custom for your loved one, and families are doing it. So, so you should apply for when your child turns age 18 for a Section 8. If you're thinking they're going to move out, even if you're like, oh, I can't even imagine them moving out right now, you know, it takes a long time to get that voucher. 18. So they have to be no longer, you know, as long as they qualify for SSI, they don't have a substantial amount of income or assets, then they can apply at the age of 18 for Section 8 for SSI. So they're all tied together. All those federal entitlement programs kick in around that time. And unfortunately, that Section 8 voucher, there is a bit of a waiting list there. And we have a housing checklist, so I can send that over to you, Pam, too, to share with everyone. It kind of goes through this presentation a little bit and just organizes it under the 5 factors. And I know this is, again, kind of very broad, but I hope that it gave you a couple ideas and a couple different tips on how to kind of break it down a little bit and how to think about it in a way that hopefully is a little bit more easier to process and relieving a little bit of the stress, right? You don't need to do it right when your kid turns 22. You have time. Not many kids move out when they turn 22 these days. I feel like they're living there as long as they can.
It's true. No child moves out at 22 these days, or if they have, they come back at some point. So I think to think about these issues always is a bit anxiety provoking. And so the hope is, I want to read a comment that one of you can probably see it in the chat as well. You kind of just answered this, but how much of an expert do we need to become in all of this? It's a little overwhelming. And yes, it can feel overwhelming. But one of the things that you can congratulate yourself on is that you came tonight and you're beginning to gather this information. I think of it in a way like parenting. We all want to be perfect parents, but really all we need to be is good enough. And I think it's the same in thinking about transition. It really is important to understand the landscape and to take it in little chunks. So starting early is really helpful in that way because you have time to take it in little chunks. And time to kind of process it and make connections between all the different things that you're hearing so that you can sort of map your own understanding of the system. But then the thing that you already are an expert in and will continue to be an expert in is an expert on your child. And it's sort of putting your child in the middle of this landscape and being able to determine and look at both what's possible and what's in your own vision for what your child needs to have that good life in the future. So try to calm yourself with the idea that you are the expert in the most important thing, and that really, if you continue to gather information in presentations like this and otherwise, you will begin to establish a pretty good working knowledge about a lot of the possibilities. But that's only a part of it. Your child and what your child needs and the kind of life you imagine for your child is really at the center of it. And there are lots of people to help.
Yeah, you're a great resource, Pam. Unbelievable. So very helpful for so many families.
Well, and was really wonderful. There's a question, can we get a copy of the slides from this? Everybody tried to take copious notes, but sometimes they move pretty quickly. Will what we heard tonight be in the sort of housing checklist that you'll send?
Yeah, I think the housing checklist will be a more organized way to kind of pull together the entire presentation. So I'll send that over to you so you can have that. And then the other question is, do you need to be approved for SSI before AFC? So no, but kind of, because Mass Health, you have to be eligible for Mass Health, and usually that is through the SSI application for many individuals, but you also can apply for Mass Health alone too if your child's not ready yet for SSI for whatever reasons. But I suggest typically doing it through the SSI application. So yes and no.
Yeah, I encourage parents to apply for SSI for their child at 18. We don't know what are going to happen to resources in the future, and being eligible for a support program from the government is, I think, an important piece of making sure that there will be support there into the future. It is also a source of income to help with all of the expenses that come with raising a child, a young adult, and an adult. with disabilities. So it's if you're not needing to use that financial support directly, it is also a way to pay for other expenses and then save for the future. And having Mass Health as a secondary means that if anything should happen to you, your child will have insurance. So getting it through SSI, you really get a lot of benefits all in one. Are there any other questions? Want to make sure we leave a little room for any. Yes, there will be a link to the recording. We have recorded, so we will provide that as well.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, and maybe I missed this part. So can our son qualify for Section 8 if he's living at home, if he doesn't have like a dedicated separate space? Would he be paying rent to us? Or are there certain requirements for him to be able to receive Section 8 if he's living at home? So certain kinds of living arrangements that are required to be considered paying us rent and receiving the Section 8.
So he would not qualify for a Section 8 voucher if living in part of your primary residence. However, as a parent, you could be a Section 8 landlord if he does have a separate area that would qualify for a Section 8 voucher. This could be like an in-law apartment, which maybe wouldn't have a full kitchen, maybe it has a microwave instead of a stove. And each town is very specific on its zoning laws and what qualifies as a rental. It doesn't mean it has to be a standalone. So actually, I can't believe I forgot to mention this. So when my brother got the Section 8 voucher when he was 18 years old, my parents did some renovations to their home because in their basement, there was a separate entrance and then a very large window that was considered a second way of egress. And then also you could go upstairs. So they have a Section 8 voucher and it's technically an in-law. And because he has a disability, they can't rent it to him, but it is a very, very separate space of the house. And he doesn't share, a kitchen. He has his own bathroom, he has his own living room. He has his own space. So that's kind of part of our transition plan, was to have his job coach go in there. He now knows to take, some milk out of the refrigerator when he's thirsty and hungry. And so there is a way, if you get the voucher, to kind of figure it out. We've had a couple families that the voucher came actually quicker than they were expecting, and they did some work to their primary house. But don't do the work before you go. You want to go to the housing authority and have a conversation with them. Really make sure that they're included in the discussion, because they may say, "What? You just made all these renovations and you didn't tell us anything?" Like, you need to completely change that back to what you initially did. So it's very town specific on what would qualify for a Section 8. I hope that was helpful and not too much, but
yeah. Alex, that brings up another question. Could you speak just a little bit to if your child gets the Section 8 voucher before you're ready and you can't do those renovations, what happens then? Do you have to give up the Section 8 voucher and go back on the list, or do you give up your place forever?
So just like you said, you can go right back to the list. So you're not ready, that's perfectly fine. And you will go back on the list, and then maybe next time that your name comes up, then they'll be ready at that point. So that's why suggested, and what Pam said too, is applying right when they turn age 18, because worst thing that happens, they get approved and you're not ready. And then goes right back on, and doesn't prohibit them from not being able, or from being able to get it in the future.
Thank you. All right. So if there are no other questions, we'll close, and thank you, Alex, for being with us again. We'll look forward to the next time. And I'm gonna quote a parent in the chat that says, "Thank you so much, Alexandria, for all this great information. It is overwhelming, but I think I will slowly start to understand this info." So thank you. That says it all.
And thank you, Pam, for hosting. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us. Take care, all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.